Welcome again. And today I'll be touching the GetX state management again, but today we'll take a different approach. We'll be using simplified examples. We'll be writing everything from scratch just to demonstrate and show you how you can use GetX to enable your understanding. Okay, so everyone will follow me as we go through GetX management. Okay, and if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask. This is my time with you. Okay, so state management with GetX. GetX is actually a very big package. Offers features like routing, state management, and other things, right? But our focus today will be with GetX. The central thing to managing state with GetX are what we call controllers. Okay. Uh, Get uses controllers for managing states. Okay, in Get there is a base class called GetX controller, and every controller you'll be creating essentially must inherit or extend this base class called GetX controller. Helps Get have some information about your controller and know how to manage this life cycle, know how to initialize, dispose when it is done with it, things like that. Okay, so that's why you must always inherit GetX controller and your controller classes. Okay, so what is a controller? A controller in GetX is basically a component where your state lives. Okay, the state of your application this is where it lives. Most times, all the times, most times, let me just say GetX controllers serve as the middleman between your user interface and other components of your okay. Interfacing between all these parts and updating the UI when it needs to be updated, calling APIs and everything. Controller is the one that does that. So the controller is a very, very, very important guy in your applications. So we'll be looking at examples, how to write controllers, how to use to manage states, right? Another thing to note about state management in GetX is there are two approaches. Oh, there are two approaches. The first approach is reactive, which is the most common. First approach is reactive, which is the most common, and the second approach is imperative. So reactive basically means in programmatic terms, basically means things react automatically. For instance, you don't have to call any method. As opposed to when you're using a normal set state. State management with set state is imperative. For your UI to react to state change, you have to explicitly call set state. But in reactive mechanisms, you don't necessarily have to call set state. You just change your state and the UI gets automatically updated with the new values. Okay, so that's what reactive is. Reactive versus imperative. So we'll be looking at reactive first and imperative second. Reactive state heavily makes use of something we call observables. OBX, OBX, all the same thing, right? Potato. So OBX are basically, if you are familiar with change notifier or value notifier, OBX are similar to that in the sense that they kind of wrap values inside themselves and they have listeners attached to them that get notified when that value changes. So that's why with an OBX value, it says things like OBS dot value, this dot value. So that's basically how you mutate an OBX. So OBX is used in reactive state management. While in imperative we GetX, you just use your normal values. The thing you should do is that once you update that value, you must always call the update method from your controller. The controller updates method, and that updates method is defined in your GetX controller base class. Remember, I said you must extend or inherit. Well, extend and inherit means the same thing in programming. You must inherit that GetX controller to gain access to this update method. Okay, so that's for imperative. So, okay, so let's quickly jump into the code and write some examples of reactive state management to help you understand better. Okay, so my VS Code should be up. You can see it. Give me a thumbs up. Give me a big thumbs up. Okay. Thank you very much, Ngozi. So here we have a very simple application. Let me just call it a screen. It's not an application. A simple screen, right? Uh, so the idea is, first of all, show you how you manage state with set state. Then I'll show you how you do it with a controller to help you understand. So in a set state kind of scenario, you basically define your states inside this place. Maybe it's loading state initially set to false, right? And then you would have a method or maybe a setter. Then inside that setter, you call a set state that changes the value of its loading to the value you're calling it. And then your getter that just simply passes the value to whoever is asking for it. So see what's going on here, right? Anytime you want to change the value of your loading variable, you do this. This could as well be a method. Call it set is loading. This could as well be a method, right? So let's say we have a button component here. Let's give that 12. Okay, and in this button component, we just call button component. We just call our set loading method, and we give it the opposite value. So this is Flutter by default without any state management system, right? This works for simple scenarios, but hardly works for more complex use cases, right? So this is imperative because you can see once I want to change the loading state, I have to always call set is loading, or I have to call a method inside set is loading. I can call set state here directly. Okay. So, but what GetX offers you in reactive state management is it takes away the burden of having to call any method anytime you want your UI to update. So let's define an example controller here. Let's see, let's call this example controller. This okay. Just to demonstrate what's going on here. Okay.
So your screen has gone off.
Yes, I want to share the application.
Okay.
Can you see the application now?
Yes, yes.
So we saw the code that controls this application now. So let's just try it. Remember, I passed the set is loading method to the unpressed callback. So once I press it, toggle, see state is loading, toggle state is not loading. So this is your default set state. This is how it behaves. I have to call a method every time I need to update the state of the user interface, right? Okay. So let's now see what GetX offers us, and so you can learn to appreciate it. So with GetX, your controllers must inherit GetX controller. Let me quickly stop sharing this. I VS Code. This is the typical base signature for a GetX controller, right? You give it call, you say define class, blah blah blah, my controller. It's always good practice to suffix your controller class into its controller. This could as well be example, right? But if it's just example, it might be hard to know what it's doing when you encounter it in a strange code base. So it's always important and best practice to prefix your controllers with a controller word. Sorry, suffix, not prefix, suffix. So see what's going on here, right? Inside this example controller, we define our state of our application. I'm just using an is loading state value as an example because that's the most common. But there are other things that can serve as states. Maybe it could be a boolean that checks if something has been done. Maybe if an ad has been loaded or something. Anything state, you define it here. And with imperative, so with reactive state management, you use .obs. This is an extension method. So if you open it up real quick, exactly. So this is the definition of OBS. If you open it up real quick, you can see that it's an extension method. So what it does is it wraps your value inside an RX. Okay, so it wraps this boolean value inside an RX. That's why you have the type here to be RX. But then we want to use this controller now. How do we use it? We find it because we've already put it previously. It's assumed that this thing runs and puts our controller. We find it and we pass it the type. It's an example of controller. That's the type. We find it here. Okay. So so now we have this controller. We want to react to the is loading state inside this controller for our application. How do we do that? Okay, we simply do controller dot is loading the value. The value gives us the boolean value that we want to use in our conditional. Okay, and here we do a controller. It's loading the value. We set it to, let's say the previous value was $. So that I can always toggle. So let's see what this example does in a minute. Ngozi, you're saying you didn't hear me. Ngozi, can you hear me?
Yes, when you were trying to explain, there was a place we didn't hear you, so I was telling you to explain again. When you were still explaining again, we did not hear anything. So that's what I was saying. It's only up until this point where you started giving us we're applying it in the that's in applying the controller and creating instances from
Okay.
Get that we started getting you.
Okay, but did you get to this point? Do you understand to this point we are now? You want
Yeah,
to test out the
I
controller.
understand, but faintly because you were talking about because you moved to bindings, then you came back to instantiate an instance of the get whatever. So I understand, but we didn't really get the explanation you were giving. That's it.
So what I was explaining that first to first put it and then find it. And then I explained that ideally how you do that is you extract the putting logic into a bindings class. And I opened up a file that showed an example of a bindings class. Okay, did you see that example? Hello.
Yes, I did. I sent a thumbs up. I didn't know you didn't see it. Yes, I saw that example.
Okay, so but for now, for this example, we are going to be putting it inside our widget. Okay, just to showcase the example. Okay, for the example purposes, let me say it like that. Okay, so you can see my phone screen, right? And in the code, we are toggling the loading state, but you can see that when I press this button, nothing happens. Okay, I'm pressing the button and nothing happens. Everything is correct. Well, almost correct, right? We are toggling the loading state, setting it to true, false, and when it is set to true, false, the text is supposed to change, right? Um, text is supposed to change, but it's not changing. So why is that? That's because of something called the OBX, the OBX widget. So the OBX widget is what enables our UI react to state changes from the controller. Okay, so take note again. I'll repeat that the OBX widget is what allows us to react to state changes from the controller, provided that that controller has .obs variables. Remember, I defined my exploding value with a .obs, which gave me an ROX bool. So whenever an ROX type changes, anything inside an OBX will react to that change. So how do we fix this thing real quick? So let me open up my VS Code to show you. Okay, so this is how you fix it. You come to anywhere, any widget any widget you want to react to the state change. That specific widget itself is where you put inside an OBX. So you wrap it inside an OBX. So with this now, um, okay, wrap with widgets, wrap it with an OBX, but it doesn't take a child parameter. Then it takes a closure, simple builder. Important to note here is that it is not because it was not modified to show that the state has been modified, but the state has been modified. Um, to portray the truth of the state. Okay, so I'll go ahead quickly and also wrap this button with an OBX. Okay. Do you have a question?
And yes,
Because your hand is up.
yes, sir. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, please?
Yeah,
Okay, so you said that we wrap the particular
I
the
can hear
specific.
you. I can hear you.
Okay, so you were saying we wrap the specific widget that has to update state in any way with an OBX. So I wanted to ask first of all that so we cannot just wrap
Yes.
since we know that, okay, for instance, we have three different buttons and we are wrapping them in a column widget. Can't we just wrap that? And we know that those three buttons would change state. Can't we just wrap the three buttons in an OBX? Like wrap the column that houses, that is the parent of the three buttons in the OBX. That's one question. Then secondly, I wanted to ask that this other one that is changing state here from loading to toggle, from toggle to loading once it's pressed. Do we have to wrap the button or just the child, which is the text? I don't know if you understand my question.
Yeah, I do. I do. I do. You can wrap the text itself, and you can wrap the whole button itself. Okay. But it's always important that anywhere you have an OBX wrapping a widget, an RX value must be injected inside there. If it's not, Get is going to throw you an error telling you that you're not using the OBX how it's supposed to be used, right? And you're absolutely right. I wrapped the padding, but you can also wrap the field button, you can also wrap the text, because where we need the state change, where we are writing to it is just inside that line of code that says controller is loading the value. Okay. Once it's wrapped with an OBX, then everything inside it is going to react to state change. And for your first question, why don't you wrap the whole column since everything inside it is going to be reacting? Well, programmatically, that is correct. If you write that code, it's going to run. But then performance and optimization and efficiency, uh, most times your column might consist of a lot of widgets. Okay. Your code might consist a lot of widgets, and most times
Yeah,
rebuilding
yeah, yeah.
widgets, you know how Flutter works, right? Rebuilding widgets can sometimes be expensive. So it's best you wrap the specific widget that needs to react to that state change with an OBX for performance purposes. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. So I think, can you see my VS Code now?
Yes, we can see it.
Give me a thumb. Okay, thank you. So this is what happened, right? I've wrapped. Remember, our state was not changed. Our state was not changing on the UI when we looked at the mobile application, right? But we were toggling the states quite fine, but the UI was lying to us. Okay. So now I've wrapped everything with an OBX. Now let's quickly
Now we can see your mobile screen.
guys. But it's set to fall. So when I click on this toggle button, so you can see the UI now reflects the true state of your application. Okay. In the previous example, right? It was updating the state, but the UI was not refreshing to show us the updated state. how to fix that is wrap with OBX. Wrap with OBX. So you can see that now in this example I showed. Let me switch to my VS Code. So in this example, I've showed now the state of your UI. Okay. Simply saying it's loading the value equal to this, just change, set it to something you want, and every other thing will react accordingly. Okay. So that's about reactive state management. So let's quickly look at these imperative counterparts. So in our same controller, when we move this OBXs, oh, that's not what I meant to do. Just move the OBX, not the entire thing. Okay. So in our same controller, we want to look at imperative state management. The state management where you have to explicitly call the method for your UI to refresh. And that's with something called the update method. And that update method is only available inside the GetX controller. So for you to get access to it, you have to extend the GetX controller. And that's how your controllers have to extend the GetX. So instead of using an OBS now, like I mentioned before, imperative we use just normal values like Boolean value. Now, it's already no longer an arrays, it's now a normal bool value, okay? And because you need to mutate it, it can't be final. So you have to remove the final keyword so you can be able to mutate it. Okay, so we're gonna have a function called set loading if the bool value, and we manually mutate keep the value. Okay. Just to show you how wrong this is, right? Remember I said you have to call update, but let's for a minute forget to call update and see how wrong this is. And mind you, for you to react to state changes in imperative methods, you have to use something called a get builder. So this is how you use a get builder to restrain an error. Use methods now. It's just the same way you use OBX for reactive approach. Get builder is for the imperative it's called get builder. So you just wrap this thing, your widgets inside the get builder. The widgets you want to react to state change, wrap inside the get builder. Okay, so this is how a get builder looks like. Fixing controller. Now, because it takes in a controller, I no longer have to, I don't have the need, I don't need to find controller here again, because get builder will automatically find it for me and provide it to whoever needs it. And for it to do that, it has to know the type. So I have to pass it the type. This is a get builder for example controller. So we give it the type inside the type parameter braces here, right? So now I have the controller inside this builder function. I can use it to do whatever I want. Remember, this controller has a value, this loading value. So let's see how we use that now. So if controller that is loading, do this just like a previous example, right? Okay, let's quickly do that here to computer. Same controller that it will find and give these two widgets. So be no mind to it. So use the same check here. So Okay. Why I say you have to pass the type. So sample control. So we've written the code. Let's see how it works. Times now we can see simply calling set loading and changing the value. Okay, wait, I think I haven't called set loading. Hold on, set load. When we go back to my VS Code, you see the code now. So we are calling set loading, right? Nothing changes. Nothing, just like set. So let me quickly add the loading values of the text. So now in the code I've called the update. So now you can see that it's clearly updated now. Okay. So this is what happens. You have to call the update methods for the imperative approach to work. Now quick look at the code to see where I updated it. So you can see after I update the value of this loading, I call this update method. This is what does the magic. Okay, it's now going to call all the get builders that are attached to it. This get builder and this get builder, and it's going to cause them to rebuild. Okay, so that's the imperative approach. And most times why the imperative approach is not really recommended is that most times you can forget to call this update method, or maybe a bug might cause it not to call. That's why the reactive method is very recommended, because you can just easily set your values and every other thing will just react accordingly as long as they are being wrapped with an OBX. Okay. Another common issue we may have is forgetting to wrap with OBX. Okay, you must always wrap with OBX to get notified of state changes in your user interface. Okay, so that's basically how controllers work. Okay, and I think this is the part where you ask me questions. If you have any questions regarding these use cases or anything, or maybe something I said that you missed, you can ask me questions now. Okay. Okay, Philip, please go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to ask about this initializing get, initializing the controller. Sorry, creating
Mm,
an instance. I don't know how to put it, but when that's where you put this get dot put. So you
mm,
put it in the init state here in this example.
mm.
But the other examples I was trying to check out before this class, I was seeing that they were putting it, they were trying to get, that's get dot put. They're doing that get dot put in they removed this where we have this super dot key. They removed everything on that line, and that's where they initialized their get dot put. I don't know if you understand what I mean.
Okay, yeah, I do understand what you do. Okay, just below the constructor, you initialize as a parameter. You do a get
Yes,
put. So that's
yeah.
bad. That's bad practice. That's bad practice actually. So that's bad practice. Shouldn't do that. The only thing that should be parameters to your widget are is the data that your widget okay, the data widget, you should be doing that because the very, very smart people that thought about this know why they say do it this way. Okay, but you shouldn't be doing that ideally. Okay. Most times if you can make your widgets const, you can see that if we do that, your widgets won't be dot put. Okay, you can see when we try to do this now, our widgets can't be const anymore. So these are all performance optimization issues. Okay, so shouldn't do that. You said the second question. Do you have a second question?
No, that's just what I wanted to ask. So you are saying that if we're not using bindings to automatically inject or put or whatever, we have to do it in our init state.
Yes, put it in your init state and
Okay.
keep your init state clean. Wonderful. Put it in your init state, okay? Then you can find it in your build method or just simply use a get builder to find it. Okay.
Okay.
So that's that.
And we can only find it in our build method, right?
Yes, you are advised to find it in your build method. You are advised to find it in your build method.
Okay.
But sometimes you can also, well, if it's not initializing your init state, you can as well find it in your init state. Okay. But the idea is that finding it should be inexpensive because this build method is not going to be run because this set state is not going to be changed. Sorry, this state of this action is not going to be changed. That's why you can find it in your build method. Okay. But
All right, sir.
if you are using a stateful widget and you're calling set state and you're calling set state and you're trying to find, it's not advised. Just move this get to find inside the init state so that it's not trying to find it because sometimes if there are a lot of dependencies, it could take some milliseconds to find what it needs to find. Okay, but just performance issues. Okay. Is there any other question from anyone? Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of this class, and you'll be getting your tasks soon. And I hope this one will be simple, and you try to submit on time so you can be graded on time. Okay, so that's all about get state management, reactive versus imperative. Okay, thank you all for joining this class, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.